We don't treat animals here. This is a civilian hospital. Get that dog now!
K9 snapped at the air, wounded, defensive, refusing to let anyone near. Blood matted the fur along its tactical vest. The old man in the wheelchair gripped the armrests like he was holding himself together. Please. He's trained. He's injured. He won't hurt anyone. Please. Then Mary stepped forward. She knelt. Slow. Deliberate. Extended a gloved hand toward the animal that had made grown security guards press themselves against the wall. She whispered something nobody else could hear. The barking stopped. The shepherd leaned into her touch. She examined the wound right there on the ER floor. Director Sterling arrived within minutes, face flushed, voice shaking with the particular fury of a man whose authority has just been publicly ignored. You violated protocol, he said, jabbing a finger toward the exit. You're fired. Get out of my hospital. Mary finished bandaging the dog. Then she stood, calmly wheeled the old man and his shepherd through the sliding doors, and stepped outside into the night air. That's when the engines hit the driveway. 4 black SUVs. No sirens. Moving fast. The men stepping out weren't asking for the hospital director. They weren't asking for security. They were asking, very specifically, who had touched their dog. Before we dive in, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And I'm genuinely curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far these incredible stories reach. We don't treat animals here. Director Sterling's voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. Each word landed with the flat, immovable weight of a man who had spent 2 decades turning human suffering into a line-item liability. He stood rigid at the trauma bay entrance. Arms crossed over his charcoal suit, jaw set, eyes fixed on the German shepherd the way you'd look at a biohazard someone forgot to label. The dog wore a tactical vest. That detail registered somewhere in the back of every nurse's mind, though nobody said it aloud. Black mall webbing. Heavy-duty buckles. The kind of gear that doesn't come from a pet store. The shepherd's hind leg dragged slightly as it repositioned itself in front of the wheelchair, nails clicking sharp against the polished linoleum. Not a fearful retreat, a tactical adjustment. It planted itself like a wall between the old man and every white coat in the room. Blood darkened the fur just beneath the vest's lower edge. This is a civilian hospital, Sterling added, the words clipped, surgical, final. Remove that animal. Now. The K9 answered with a bark that traveled the length of the corridor and came back. In the wheelchair, the veteran seemed to fold further into himself. Narrow shoulders hunched beneath a faded navy jacket, so worn the anchor insignia had lost most of its gold. His knuckles had gone white against the armrests. When he leaned forward, his hands trembled with something that wasn't fear. He's trained, the old man said, his voice carrying the particular steadiness of a man who had spent his life making hard things sound simple. He won't hurt anyone. He's injured. Please. The air in the ER went the way air does when everyone in a room makes the same silent decision not to move. A nurse near the supply cart shot a glance toward security. 2 guards now hugging the far wall, hands nowhere near the dog, going nowhere near the dog. Another nurse took an involuntary half-step backward when the shepherd barked again, this time low and sustained, a sound less like warning and more like a verdict. The ER was already drowning. Monitors alarming down the hall. A gurney wedged at an angle in the corridor nobody had moved in 20 minutes. Phones ringing in overlapping rhythms at the nurse's station. But the space around that wheelchair had become a vacuum, a 10-foot radius of liability and held breath that nobody wanted to be responsible for entering. That animal is a threat to every patient and staff member in this facility, Sterling said. His voice had dropped, which somehow made it worse. If it bites someone, we are legally exposed. I will not have it. The shepherd adjusted its stance again, weight shifting forward, ears flat, lips peeled back just enough to suggest it had done this before. Held a perimeter, waited for orders, protected one specific person at the expense of everything else in the room. Nobody moved. And then Mary stepped forward. She was 26 years old, 8 months on the floor. Her badge read M. Chun, RN, Emergency Services, the laminate still without a scratch. Her scrubs were the standard St. Jude's blue, her blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Everything about her read rookie, except her eyes, which had gone somewhere else entirely. Calm. Calculating. Distant in the way of someone running a silent assessment that had nothing to do with hospital protocol. She crossed the 10-foot radius without hesitating. Nurse Chun. Sterling's voice cracked like a whip. Do not. She was already kneeling. Not in a crouch, fully down, one knee on the linoleum, body lowered and angled slightly sideways, the way you'd approach a wounded animal that had been trained to interpret direct eye contact as aggression. Her right hand extended slowly, palm up, fingers loose. She didn't reach for the dog. She offered herself to it and waited. The shepherd's bark cut off mid-snarl. The animal's head turned. Ears rotated forward. Something moved behind its eyes. Recognition without logic, the way dogs sometimes respond not to what they see, but to what they sense underneath it. Mary said something under her breath, barely audible, a sequence of sounds that weren't quite words in any language the nurses around her could name. The shepherd stepped forward and pressed the top of its skull against her open palm. The room exhaled. Mary's free hand moved to the tactical vest's lower buckle with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this. Not something like this specifically, more than once. Her gloved fingers found the wound beneath without searching for it. Her expression didn't change. Her hands didn't shake. She reached into the emergency kit on her belt, standard issue, the same kit every nurse on the floor carried, and began to work. Director Sterling found his voice from somewhere behind her. You are in direct violation of. I know, Mary said, without looking up. She kept working. Sterling said her name 3 more times. Each repetition louder than the last, each one landing against Mary's back and sliding off like water off glass. She wasn't ignoring him the way a defiant employee ignores a superior. She was ignoring him the way a surgeon ignores a ringing phone mid-incision. Not out of disrespect, but because something more important had her complete and total attention, and the hierarchy of that fact was simply not negotiable. Her fingers moved along the shepherd's flank in a deliberate sequence. Not stroking. Not soothing in the way civilians soothe animals, with nervous, unpredictable energy that dogs read as fear. This was something structured. Pressure applied to specific points along the animal's neck and shoulder in a pattern that had no name on any nursing curriculum at any civilian institution in the country. 3 points of contact. Specific intervals. Held for exactly 2 seconds each. The shepherd's breathing slowed. Its weight shifted backward off its front legs. The combat-ready posture collapsing inward, replaced by something closer to exhaustion, as though the animal had been waiting for permission to stop being afraid. It lowered itself to the linoleum beside Mary, tactical vest rising and falling in long, measured breaths. The old man in the wheelchair made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Mary worked quickly now. The wound beneath the vest was a deep lateral laceration, clean-edged, which told her something. Running 4 inches along the muscle group above the shepherd's left hip. Not a fall. Not a collision. She didn't let herself finish that thought. She irrigated, packed, and applied pressure with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had learned these skills somewhere that didn't give out certificates. Security. Sterling's voice had crossed from fury into something colder. Remove her. Now. Neither guard moved. One of them, the younger one, ex-military if Mary had to guess, something in the way he stood, was watching her hands with an expression she recognized. Not confusion. Recognition. He'd seen field dressing applied under pressure before. Not in a classroom. Somewhere else. He didn't take a single step in her direction. Mary secured the final wrap, checked the tension twice with her thumb, and held her palm flat against the shepherd's ribs for a moment. Feeling for the breath, counting without counting, satisfying something clinical and deeply instinctive at the same time. The dog turned its head and looked at her. She looked back. You're okay, she said quietly. Not a reassurance. A report. Behind her, she heard Sterling pull out his phone. Heard him say legal and liability and immediate termination in the tight, over-enunciated tones of a man building a case in real time. Mary stripped her gloves, reached for a fresh pair, and turned her attention to the old man in the wheelchair, who was watching her with eyes that held far too much history to belong to someone who simply owned a dog. His hands were folded in his lap. Still now, where they had trembled before. He watched her the way people watch someone do something they had stopped believing anyone would do, with a quietness that bordered on grief. Sir, Mary said, her voice low enough that Sterling couldn't claim it. I need to check your circulation. May I? The old man nodded once. She was halfway through her assessment, radial pulse, skin temp, checking the color at his nail beds with the practiced economy of someone who could triage in the dark, when Sterling stepped into her peripheral vision and stopped. He had the phone at his side now. Whatever call he'd made, it was finished. He didn't need backup anymore. He had made his decision. Mary Chun. The full name. The tone that meant the conversation was already over. She didn't look up. Effective immediately, your employment at St. Jude's Medical Center is terminated. He said it loudly, deliberately, pitched to carry across the nurse's station, down the corridor, into every set of ears in the emergency wing. A public execution, clinical and clean. You will surrender your badge, you will vacate this floor, and if you are not gone in 10 minutes, I will have security escort you out. The ER went very quiet. Not the held breath quiet of before. Something heavier. The kind of silence that follows when people witness something they know is wrong and have already decided they won't say so. Mary finished checking the veteran's pulse. She noted the rate, noted the steadiness, noted the way the old man's jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly when Sterling began speaking. Not in fear. In recognition. He had seen men like this before too. Men who issued orders from a safe distance and called it leadership. She stood, removed her gloves, reached into her pocket and unclipped her badge. Set it on the nurse's station counter without a word. Then she turned back to the shepherd, knelt one more time, and checked the dressing she'd applied. Edges secure, no bleed-through, the animal calm and still beneath her hands. She adjusted the tension on the outer wrap by a fraction. Satisfied herself it would hold. She stood, moved behind the wheelchair, and released the brake with her foot. You don't walk out of here like this is nothing, Sterling said, following 2 steps behind her. You violated protocol. You endangered this staff. You should be ashamed. Good night, Director. She said it the way you close a door. Firmly, without drama, with the absolute certainty that what is on the other side of it no longer concerns you. The automatic doors parted. Night air hit them, cool and wide and indifferent to everything that had just happened inside. The shepherd walked slowly beside the wheelchair, favoring its left side, staying close. The parking lot stretched ahead, quiet under yellow light. Mary pushed the chair forward and didn't look back. She made it exactly 11 steps before she heard the engines. Not one engine. Several, low, synchronized, the kind of mechanical rumble that doesn't announce itself so much as arrive, felt in the chest before it registers in the ears. Mary's hands tightened on the wheelchair handles. Not in fear. In recognition. She knew that sound. The first set of headlights swept the far end of the parking lot in a wide, bleaching arc. Then the second. Then the third and fourth in close succession, each pair brighter than the last, the combined wash of light turning the driveway into something closer to noon than midnight. The security guard at the booth, a heavy-set man named Darnell who had worked the St. Jude's night shift for 11 years without incident, stepped out of his booth with his hand raised in the universal gesture of stop. He lowered it almost immediately. The lead SUV didn't accelerate. It didn't need to. It simply continued at the same unhurried, absolute pace that communicated more effectively than speed ever could that the vehicle and everything behind it had already decided where it was going and had no interest in negotiating the point. Darnell stepped back, then further back. Then he was standing against the booth with his radio in his hand and no clear idea who he would call. For vehicles. Black. No plates visible from where Mary stood. Government issue in the way that goes beyond make and model. Something in the deliberate blankness of them, the absence of any marking or insignia, that is its own kind of statement. They fanned into the driveway in a practiced spread and stopped. The shepherd was on its feet. Mary hadn't seen it rise. One moment Rook had been moving slowly beside the wheelchair, favoring its left side, and the next it was standing fully upright, ears forward, the pain apparently negotiable now that something had triggered a deeper instinct. Its eyes were fixed on the lead vehicle. Its tail was still. Not tucked, still. The posture of an animal that has worked alongside vehicles like these before and is waiting to determine whether what steps out of them is a threat or a known quantity. Behind Mary, the hospital doors slid open again. She heard Sterling's footsteps stop on the threshold. Heard the exact moment his confidence left him. A small, involuntary sound, barely audible. The noise a man makes when the scale of something exceeds his ability to manage it. The parking lot held its breath. Then the lead door opened. The lead SUV's door opened first. Not with urgency. Not with the tactical burst of men trained to exit vehicles fast and low. It opened the way doors open when the person behind them has spent 40 years making entrances that don't require announcement. Measured. Deliberate. Final. The man who stepped out was tall in the way that had nothing to do with height. Full dress uniform, the kind that doesn't come out for routine calls. Metals that didn't catch the parking lot light so much as absorb it. White cap pulled low and straight, the brim a hard line above eyes that were already scanning. Not the building, not the vehicles, not the security camera above the entrance. He was scanning the woman standing 11 steps from the door with her hands on a wheelchair. He found her in under 2 seconds. Rear Admiral Silas Thorne had the face of a man who had made decisions in rooms where the wrong answer meant body bags, and had lived long enough to stop apologizing for the right ones. His jaw was set. His posture was the kind that doesn't come from a gym. It comes from decades of standing in front of people and being the last word in the room. He walked toward her. Behind him, 8 men fanned out in a formation that wasn't quite casual and wasn't quite tactical. Something in between, the resting state of people who are always 30 seconds from either. Armed. Helmeted. Visors up. American flag patches on their shoulders catching the cold light. They weren't looking at the hospital. They were looking at the dog. Thorne stopped 6 feet from Mary. His eyes dropped to the shepherd, to the dressing on its flank, the careful wrap, the animal's settled posture. And something moved across his face that wasn't quite emotion and wasn't quite its absence. He looked back up. Who did that? His voice was exactly what she expected. Not loud. Not aggressive. The voice of a man who had never needed volume to make a room understand him completely. Mary met his eyes. I did. Thorne held her gaze for a long moment. Behind him, 2 of his men had moved closer, and she was aware, in the way she was always aware of things without appearing to be, that they were not looking at her the way soldiers look at civilians. I need the medic who treated this animal, Thorne said, and there was something careful in the phrasing. Medic. Not nurse. Not ma'am. A specific word, chosen with the precision of a man who understood that words are intelligence. That's you. It wasn't a question. Behind her, she heard the hospital doors slide open. Sterling's footsteps on the pavement, fast, eager, already recalibrating. Already sensing which way the power had shifted and moving toward it. Thorne didn't look at him. His eyes hadn't left Mary's face. I think, he said quietly, we need to talk about where you learned to do that. Mary didn't answer right away. Not because she didn't have an answer. Because she was deciding, in the space of 2 heartbeats, how much of the truth she was willing to spend here, in a parking lot, under yellow light, in front of a man whose recognition of her was already visible in the way his posture had shifted. Barely. Imperceptibly to anyone who hadn't spent years reading rooms the way other people read text. Thorne had seen her before. He knew it. She knew it. And now they both knew the other knew. St. Jude's emergency nursing staff, she said. Even unhurried. 8 months. Thorne said nothing. Just looked at her with the patient, excavating stillness of a man who had sat across tables from people trained to resist far more than a prolonged silence. That was when the second car opened. Not one of the military SUVs. The dark sedan that had pulled in behind them, no markings, no plates she could read from this angle. That one. 2 people stepped out. Civilian clothes, but the kind of civilian clothes that are a uniform in their own right. The woman in front was mid-40s, compact, with a badge case already open in her hand. Federal. Not DOD. Something quieter than DOD. She walked with the specific economy of someone who had already read every file she needed to read before arriving. She stopped beside Thorne without looking at him. Her eyes were on Mary. Mary Elaine Chin, she said. Reading it. Or reciting it. Mary couldn't tell which, and that distinction mattered. Graduated Mercy College nursing program 18 months ago. Prior to that, she paused, and the pause was deliberate, for years unaccounted for in any federal employment database. The parking lot was very still. That's not unusual, Mary said. The touch sequence you use to subdue the K9 is, the woman replied. It's a classified 3-point calming protocol developed for Tier 1 working dogs. It has a dissemination list of 41 people. She tilted her head slightly. You're not on it. Somewhere behind Mary, she heard Sterling make a sound. Something between satisfaction and relief. The noise of a man who had arrived at a confrontation expecting to be the victim and suddenly found himself in the audience. She filed that away. She saved the asset, Thorne said. He wasn't defending her. He was establishing a fact, the way you set a piece on a board. The wound treatment was correct. Pressure points, irrigation sequence, wrap tension. Textbook Sockham field protocol. Exactly, the federal agent said, still watching Mary. Textbook. The shepherd made a low sound from beside the wheelchair, not a growl. Something older than a growl. The old man's hand dropped to the animal's head without looking down, automatic. The gesture of someone who had done it 10,000 times in places far darker than this. Mary looked at the agent, then at Thorne. Then very quietly, she made her decision. I want a lawyer, she said. And I want him to have clearance. The federal agent's mouth opened. Thorne raised one hand, a small gesture, barely a movement, and she closed it again. He turned to the old man in the wheelchair for the first time since he'd stepped out of the SUV. Something changed in his bearing when he did. Not softening exactly. More like the way a very old building settles. Something deep in the foundation acknowledging a weight it has carried for a long time. He brought his hand up in a salute. Full. Formal. Held. The kind you don't give to ranks. The kind you give to history. Behind him, every uniformed man in the parking lot did the same. 8 arms. Simultaneous. The snap of it audible in the cold air. Sterling made a sound. Nobody looked at him. The old man in the wheelchair straightened. The exhaustion didn't leave his face. It never fully would, but something underneath it surfaced. Like bedrock. He raised a trembling hand to his temple and returned the salute with a precision that didn't belong to the frail body performing it. Muscle memory so deep it had outlasted everything else. Master Chief Franklin Roy Garrett, Thorne said, lowering his hand. His voice had changed register, still controlled, but carrying something underneath it now. Ballast. 31 years active service. 6 combat deployments. Founding operator, SEAL Team 6. He paused. Retired. Technically. Sterling had gone the color of old chalk. And the dog, the federal agent said, softer now, something recalibrated in her tone, is Delta Foxtrot 9. Call sign Rook. She looked down at the shepherd, who regarded her with calm, dark eyes from beside the wheelchair. 3 combat deployments. Confirmed role in 2 classified interdiction operations. Recipient of the PDSA Dickin Medal. Another pause. The animal holds the equivalent commendation status of a staff sergeant. The silence that followed was a different species from the ones before it. Mary looked at Rook. The shepherd looked back at her. She thought about the wound beneath the tactical vest. The clean-edged laceration she had deliberately not finished thinking about in the ER. She finished the thought now. That cut hadn't come from a fall. She filed it. Said nothing. She saved him. Garrett's voice came from the wheelchair, low, unhurried, carrying the particular authority of a man who had spent decades saying things once and only once. He wasn't looking at Thorne. He was looking at Mary. Rook doesn't let people touch him. Not strangers. Not handlers he hasn't worked with. His eyes held hers. Hasn't let anyone touch him since we got back. Back from where? He didn't say. Didn't need to. Sterling stepped forward from the periphery where he'd been standing, reassembling himself, reaching for the voice he used when he needed to reclaim a room. I wanted on record that this nurse was terminated prior to. Director. Thorne said it without turning around. Sterling stopped. Be quiet. He was quiet. They gave her a paper cup of water she didn't drink and a chair she didn't fully sit in. The consultation room was the kind of neutral that takes effort to achieve. No windows, no art, no surface that invited the eye to rest anywhere long enough to think. A table. For chairs. Fluorescent light that flattened everything beneath it. Someone had chosen this room carefully, which told her the choice had been made before they arrived. They had known they were coming here tonight. She filed that too. The federal agent, whose name Mary still didn't have, and understood she wasn't meant to, sat across the table with a single manila folder closed in front of her. The folder was thin. Mary knew enough to know that meant nothing. The things that mattered rarely required much paper. Thorne stood near the door with his arms behind his back. Not blocking it. Just present in the way that made the room feel smaller. We're going to skip the part where you maintain the nursing school story, the agent said. Not unkindly. The way a doctor skips small talk with a patient who already knows their diagnosis. It'll save us both time. Mary looked at the closed folder. For years, the agent continued. Between the ages of 22 and 26, you don't exist. No tax filings. No lease agreements. No digital footprint beyond a single email account with 11 messages in it, all of them decoys. She placed one finger on the folder without opening it. Someone built you a very clean exit. People move around, Mary said. People do, the agent agreed. Ghosts don't leave fingerprints on classified K9 protocols. The fluorescent light hummed. Thorne shifted his weight almost imperceptibly near the door. Here's what I need to understand, the agent said, and leaned forward slightly. The touch sequence, the field irrigation technique, the wrap tension, which, I'm told, was calibrated within 2 millimeters of SOCOM standard without a reference guide. She paused. You didn't learn that in 18 months of emergency nursing. So I need you to tell me who you are, who trained you, and who decided you were worth erasing. Mary looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Thorne. He was watching her with an expression she had seen once before, across a different table, in a different room, in a different life, when someone had asked her to make a choice that couldn't be unmade. He had been younger then. So had she. You were there, she said quietly. Not an accusation. A fact, placed between them like an object on a table. Thorne said nothing, but something behind his eyes confirmed it. The agent looked between them and understood that she had just become the third person in a conversation that had started long before tonight. Mary set down the paper cup. I want to know, she said carefully, why Rook's wound was a blade cut. And I want to know who made it. The room went very still. Thorne looked at the agent. The agent closed the folder. The answer, when it came, was not an answer. The agent reopened the folder, slowly, deliberately, and slid a single sheet across the table. A form. Pre-printed. The kind that exists in triplicate in filing systems that officially don't exist. Mary looked at it without touching it, reading what she needed to read in 3 seconds and understanding what it meant in 1. They wanted her back in. Formalized. Documented this time. She left the paper where it was. Thorne straightened near the door. The particular straightening of a man who is about to speak and wants his posture to do some of the work first. But before he could, the door opened. Sterling came through it. He had combed his hair, straightened his tie, assembled himself back into the version of himself that ran board meetings and handled press inquiries. The version that had never been standing in a parking lot watching 8 military men salute a man in a wheelchair while his authority quietly turned to vapor around him. He carried a single sheet of hospital letterhead. I've been in contact with our legal team, he said, and directed it at the middle distance between Mary and Thorne, committing to neither. Given the circumstances, and in the interest of institutional goodwill with federal partners, he set the letterhead on the table beside the form. St. Jude's is prepared to rescind the termination. Effective immediately. Full reinstatement. We'd consider tonight a miscommunication. He managed something approximating a collegial smile. Mary looked at the letter. Then she looked at Sterling, fully, in the way she hadn't allowed herself to in the ER, when she'd been focused on things that mattered. She looked at him the way you look at something. Once you've decided, you only need to look at it once. You called security on a wounded dog, she said, and a man who spent 31 years making sure people like you could sleep without consequence. Sterling opened his mouth. You performed a public termination to establish dominance over your own staff, she continued, her voice carrying the same flat, unhurried quality it had carried all night. And now you're here because a rear admiral is in the building and you've done the arithmetic on what that means for your accreditation review. The collegial smile had stopped working. This isn't goodwill, Mary said. She picked up his letterhead between 2 fingers and held it out to him. This is self-preservation with a header. Sterling didn't take it. She set it back on the table. I watched your staff tonight, she said, standing. They knew what was right. Every one of them. They were just more afraid of you than they were of a wounded animal. She straightened her scrubs, the habit of it, automatic, the gesture of someone closing a shift. That's not a miscommunication. That's a culture. And I won't work inside it. She stepped around the table. Sterling moved to speak again. Thorne looked at him. He didn't speak. She walked out of the consultation room without looking back. The corridor was quieter now. The ER's ambient chaos had settled into its late-night rhythm, the lower frequency of a place that never fully sleeps but occasionally exhales. A monitor alarming softly somewhere down the hall. The squeak of a gurney wheel. A nurse at the station who looked up when Mary passed, and then looked away, quickly, the way people look away from things they don't know how to categorize. Mary didn't stop. Thorne caught up with her near the exit. He didn't rush. He simply appeared beside her with the efficiency of a man who had spent decades covering ground without appearing to hurry. There's a position, he said. Embedded medical specialist. Tier 1 adjacent. Full cover, full support. The kind of work that. I know what kind of work it is, Mary said. Then you know it matters. So does the other kind. She pushed through the door. The night air hit her the same way it had an hour ago. Cool, indifferent, wide. The parking lot had thinned. 2 of the black SUVs remained. The sedan was gone. Near the far end of the lot, under the yellow light, Garrett's wheelchair was visible beside one of the vehicles, Rook lying flat at his feet, head up, watching the door with the patient vigilance of an animal that had learned that exits mattered. The shepherd saw her, and his tail moved once. Low and slow. A measured thing. Mary crossed the lot toward them. She crouched in front of Rook and checked the dressing one final time. Edges still clean, no bleed-through, the animal breathing steadily beneath her hands. She checked the tension, satisfied herself, and stayed there a moment longer than the assessment required. Garrett watched her. "Where will you go?" he asked. She had been thinking about it since the consultation room. Since before that, if she was being honest, since the moment she'd set her badge on the nurse's station counter and felt, beneath the loss of it, something that wasn't loss at all. "There's a free clinic," she said. "Outside Billings. Runs on 3 part-time volunteers and a supply budget that wouldn't cover a week of Sterling's dry cleaning." She stood. "They've been asking for a full-time nurse for 8 months. Garrett was quiet for a moment. "Not much glory in that," he said. "Not discouraging. Testing." "No," Mary agreed. She reached into her pocket. The badge was gone, still on the counter inside, but her fingers found the small trauma shears she'd carried every shift for 8 months. She turned them once in her hand and tucked them back. She had everything she needed. She said goodbye to Rook in the quiet way she'd said everything to him tonight. She nodded once to Garrett, who returned it with the gravity of a man who understood the weight of a decision made cleanly. Thorne stood at the edge of the lot, watching, his hands behind his back. She met his eyes once across the distance between them. He nodded. A single, small movement. An acknowledgement. Not an approval. She didn't need his approval. Something older than that. The recognition one person extends to another when they watch them choose correctly at considerable cost. Mary turned toward the road. Behind her, the hospital hummed and flickered and went on being what it was. Ahead, the night was dark and very open. She walked into it.